I feel really overwhelmed today as I shared the platform with the greatest medical icons of today, Dr. Deepak Chopra and Dr. Naresh Trehan. Being one of the greatest speakers of our time, Dr. Deepak has changed many lives that he has touched. He has brought ray of hope to many people and has enlightened the world about the union of two most basic fundamentals of human life, science and spiritualism, which if achieved can do miracles. We are also truly honored to have with us Dr. Naresh Trehan, the name in the field of cardiology. While of course, he has many accolades and achievements to his credit, but the greatest credit to his name, which I personally feel, is the positivity that he has brought to every human being, which we have seen, all of us seen during the COVID period also. The thread that runs common in both these icons, both these personalities, is the optimism that they have brought to each and everybody's life that they have even remotely touched, and that is needed today more than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, as the world undergoes continuous change, everyone strives towards leading a successful life. And this necessitates to unleash the unrealized potential in oneself to achieve and to be successful, to guide and enlighten us on the way forwards for achieving the success in the most simplistic and the uncomplicated manner. We have with us today Dr. Deepak Chopra. Once again, thank you, sir, for gracing with your esteemed presence. As I mentioned, we also have with us Dr. Naresh Trehan to guide us on the importance of mental strength with that of physical well-being. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. We also have with us today Dr. H.K. Chopra, who is our chief advisor at SCOPE. And in fact, he has been the soul behind this event, and without whose commitment this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you, Dr. H.K. Ladies and gentlemen, this is by far one of the most prestigious event ever organized by SCOPE, and we are happy to associate with Tata Sky Famhealth and IPCA for the same. We look forward to one of the greatest enlightening sessions today, and I'm sure that with the kind of experience we have on board, the participants are going to benefit on multitude of aspects about life and health. Thank you very much.
Dr. Deepak Chopra, our chief guest and keynote speaker of the day. Dr. Naresh Trehan, our guest of honor, Mr. Atul Soti, DG SCOPE. It's really a great pleasure and honor indeed for me to be here on the platform of SCOPE on a very special occasion. And the occasion is known to all of you, Dr. Deepak Chopra's discourse on the nature of reality, unleashing the infinite potentials for well-being. I had been told to introduce the topic. I think in front of Deepak, we don't know much, but for audience, I'll just give a few remarks about what this subject is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all the expressions and connections of reality. Deepak is going to elaborate in details. A reality is what exists and what is truth. It is neither born nor dies, it's always there. Shankara said, Brahman is the absolute reality. It is consciousness, field of infinite potentialities, which is spaceless, timeless, dimensionless, ageless, omnipotent, omniscience, eternal, divine, limitless, here, there, and everywhere. We are all the holograms of this universe, and the universe is a hologram of ours. The reality is, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, Vasudev Kutumbakam. Reality is consciousness, including the higher levels of consciousness, which I'm sure many of you might gone through Deepak Chopra's book, Meta Human. Cosmic consciousness, divine or unified consciousness. We are going to listen to the seer, sage, saint, and scientist all in one, Deepak Chopra, in next few minutes. May I request our guest of honor, CMD, Medanta Group of Hospitals, and Chief Cardiac Surgeon, Medanta Hospital and Medanta Group of Hospitals, who served in New York University Medical Center almost for 18 years, established a Scott Heart Institute, which is functional, and he was there almost for 20 years. And now he has established 6 super specialty hospitals under the edges of Medanta MedCity. And we are also a part of it so far as cardiology is concerned. We feel very much honored. Dr. Naresh Tihan is recipient of prestigious Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, and Dr. B.C. Roy Award from the Government of India. Dr. Trehan is a doctor with a difference who believes in holistic healthcare with divine intervention, and is also a management guru, which I just mentioned, who is managing so many hospitals, which is a very difficult task. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Naresh Trehan, a world legend and Dian of cardiology and cardiac surgery, for his address. Dr. Naresh Trehan, sir.
First of all, good evening, good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure and a distinguished honor to be part of this discussion, because not very often do you find that kind of beliefs that you have being brought into focus and being able to discuss them on the same platform as Deepak Chopra, who has actually devoted his whole life into defining that life is not a one silo. Life, health is all connected in multiple ways with the cosmos, with your own mind, with your own soul, and ultimately it leads to your whole sense of being and your whole health. That India had a lot to offer by way of its understanding of the interrelationship between the spiritual and the being. We don't talk about the cosmos. We don't talk about energy. So all these things are very related, and I became very aware of it and started believing in it. And the second thing that happened simultaneously was that we also recognized that there were ancient sciences, traditional medicine as practiced in India or in China or countries of that order, which had a lot to contribute in the ultimate health of an individual, may it be mental, may it be physical, may it be spiritual. So well defined by Dr. Deepak Chopra about the mind-body-soul connection. So I am an actual believer in the fact that we do not in isolation look at it. And I had the ultimate experiences about 3-4 years ago. And it was the 5,151 years of Gita. And the Gita Guru of India, he actually asked me to look at how Gita influences medicine, how Gita influences health. And then that's when I did a little bit of research. And then what the lessons that came clear from there was that one, when a person comes to you, unless you address the full baggage as I described earlier, you're not treating the patient, you're just giving him a balm, a medicine that you know you will either operate on them or give them a poison or radiate them with the most powerful beam that you can find. Those are the 3 main shastras or weapons of modern medicine. With that, I will just, love to be able to hear what Deepak has to say tonight.
Thank you very much, Naresh, for your words of wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Dr. Deepak Chopra is a real Herculean task for me. He is a world-renowned pioneer in integrative medicine and personal transformation from inside out. He is the founder of Chopra Foundation, a non-profit entity for research on well-being and humanitarianism. Chopra Global, a modern-day whole health company at the intersection of science and spirituality. We just heard from Naresh. He is a professor of medicine in UCLA, San Diego, USA, and a senior scientist with Gallup organization. Time magazine described Dr. Chopra as one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century. We feel really proud. He is the author of over 90 books translated into over 43 languages, including numerous New York Times bestsellers. His 90th book, Meta Human, Unleashing Your Infinite Potentials, unlocks the secrets to moving beyond our present limitations to access a field of infinite possibilities that is reality and equilibrium is the well-being. His latest book, Total Meditation, will help everyone to achieve new dimensions of stress-free and joyful living. Dr. Chopra is a legend, luminary, and advocate of mind-body medicine. He is an Indian-American author, orator, a researcher of international repute, all in one. He is an epitome and apostle of elegance and generosity. I know him for last 42 years and learned the art of mind-body medicine from him in the United States. And I had a privilege of working with his father, Dr. Colonel K. Chopra, who was an extraordinary cardiologist known to me in my lifetime, who was more like a father, taught me cardiology and ethical values for 27 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the teacher of teachers and the world father of mind-body medicine. Please join me to welcome Dr. Deepak Chopra for his keynote address. Dr. Deepak Chopra, sir.
Thank you, Dr. H.K. Chopra, and it's a privilege to be with all of you. Naresh, great to see you again. We should converse more frequently. Mr. Sopti, thank you for hosting us. So I'd like to start off by saying that in the 70s, when Naresh was training in surgery and advanced cardiac surgery, I was a little bit behind him. I was in Boston training in internal medicine and then endocrinology and then neuroendocrinology, which, as you know, is the science of brain chemistry. In the 70s, we were looking at what we now call the molecules of emotion. This was the beginning of a big revolution, which we now take for granted. So we were looking at molecules like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, opiates, GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and other peptides that are made in the brain. Now there's a new one called anandamide, which I'll talk about in a few moments. Anandamide, a peptide that represents ananda or bliss. But we were in a very interesting time at that time, because one of my colleagues, who later became the head of brain chemistry at the NIH, her name was Candice Pert, and she one day used this expression, molecules of emotion. And immediately I knew that we were in the brink of a revolution. Today we know these molecules of emotion. There are new pharmaceuticals that are being made to actually amplify the effect of these molecules, and some to deactivate the effect of some other molecules. In other words, brain chemistry has matured to a great degree. But for me at that time, this was also the understanding of the inseparability of what happens in our mind, in our conditioned mind, but even before that, in our awareness, and how that is translated into biological responses. So I want to take you through a very brief history of how this has evolved to the point where we are now questioning the fundamental nature of reality. So please, with that, may I show the first slide? So this is a recent issue of the magazine, British magazine called New Scientist. It's a cover issue and it says Your Thinking Body. And then there's a subtitle, Why Consciousness Isn't All in the Mind. The subtitle is misleading, but the title is very revealing, because what it's saying is your body is a network of intelligence with feedback loops, self-regulation. When we enter medical school, the first thing we are told, we learn is in our physiology class, two things, inflammation and homeostasis. And they're both self-regulating activities of the body. When homeostasis is disruptive, that's the beginning of disease. And when self-regulation is not interfered with, that's health and well-being. The other thing we learn in medical school immediately is something called inflammation. So inflammation is also a protective response. If you have injury, acute injury, if you didn't have inflammation, you would bleed to death. And every time you encountered a pneumococcus, you would get pneumonia, but the inflammatory response, when it is fine-tuned, is actually a protective response. And between homeostasis and inflammation is what we call self-regulation or healing. Healing ultimately is the return of the memory of wholeness. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you what over the years I've started calling the 7 pillars of well-being. May I have the next slide, please? And these are the 7 pillars of well-being. And before I even start to talk about them, let me share with you some very interesting insights that we've only had in the last 15 to 20 years. And these are very important because most people in the scientific world and even in the medical world don't know about these insights. So let me start with right there, what the major insight is in the last 20 years. And please pay attention to what I'm going to say because it's very important. And this is what I'm saying right now. Only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. I'll repeat that. Only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant in that they guarantee the disease. These days, everybody knows what a mutation is. Every day we hear about, the Delta mutation and this mutation and that mutation, as COVID-19 virus frequently goes mutations depending on weather patterns, population density, risk of disease, etc. A mutation is a genetic variant or an error. So, genes are made of 4 letters, adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. These are the 4 alphabets of life. When I speak in English, we use 26 alphabets to communicate. Life communicates only through 4 letters, A, T, C, G. And the way you arrange them is what is called a gene. So think of the alphabet of life as A, T, C, G, standing for those 4 chemical bases, and think of genes that translate the language of life into biological expression. Now, obviously, every time genes replicate, there's a possibility of a variant, a spelling mistake. Think of genes as the word that becomes the flesh and ATCG as the alphabet. And so once in a while, there's a spelling mistake or a typo. It could be that one of the letters is upside down or is missing, or there are 2 letters instead of 1. In other words, as I said, a spelling mistake that translates into an abnormal protein or antigen that ultimately results in disease. What I'm saying right now is only 5% of these mutations guarantee disease. So if somebody has a BRCA gene, for example, for breast cancer, then that's a fully penetrant gene. And Angelina Jolie, the actress, is a well-known example of that because she had the BRCA gene and she had a preventive mastectomy, and that's still the recommendation for fully penetrant genes as in cancer. But that applies to every disease, whether it's autoimmune illness or cancer or heart disease or cerebrovascular disease or any disease you can think of, even accelerated aging and the mistakes that occur with aging. Only 5%, Alzheimer's disease, only 5% of genes are predictive. The rest are modifiable through what we call epigenetic activity. Epi means above, and epigene, therefore above the genes, a sheath of proteins called histones, and DNA is wrapped around these, and every experience alters the expression of the genes. So it's not the genes, but the expression of the genes. And as I said, only 5% of those expressions are at the moment not preventable. Even as we speak now, there are organizations like CRISPR. I have a very good friend at CRISPR. He's Indian American of Indian origin, and he guarantees that in about 5 years or less, we'll have the ability to cut and paste genes in the same way that we do emails. So you'll be able to read the barcode of a gene, delete the offensive gene or gene that causes disease, and paste the healthy gene. Now that's huge revolution, and CRISPR is already approved for sickle cell anemia and soon will be approved for other diseases. But the reason I mention this is it still affects only 5% of all illness. 95% is related to these daily activities. You know, every day we sleep, we eat, we have sensory experience, we metabolize food, we eliminate, we think, we feel. And those activities actually govern what we call our biology through activation of genes or on-off switches on genes that are basically turned on and turned off through what we call experience. So we metabolize experience into our biological responses. And there's a phrase in the Ayurvedic literature, Science of Life, that if you want to know what your experiences were like in the past, without using esoteric terms like karma, although karma is now a household word, but if you want to know what your experiences were in the past, look at your body right now. And if you want to know what your body will look like in the future, then look at your experiences right now, because we metabolize every wisp of experience and turn it into a biological response to these on-off switches on our genes that are regulated by the metabolism of experience. So where does experience occur? You know, if you ask people, where does experience occur, particularly neuroscientists, they'll say it occurs in the brain, but there's no experience in the brain. Right now, you're listening to me, you're hearing sound. There's no sound in the brain. You're seeing images, colors, forms. There's no image or colors and forms in the brain. There's no taste. There's no smell. The brain is about 3 pounds, and it's mostly fat and protein and water, and has the consistency of jello. And if you put a knife through the brain, it doesn't experience pain. In other words, the brain is not the center of experience. So where is experience occurring right now? Where is this experience occurring that you're listening to me, hearing me, thinking about what I'm saying? Where is all this occurring? The brain shows what we call neural correlates of experience, but this is one of the biggest problems in science today. What is the nature of fundamental reality? What is the universe made of? And what is the biological basis of experience? And as I go through this presentation, I want to share with you that both those questions, what is the universe made of, and what is the biological basis of consciousness, both those questions are wrong questions. And as long as we ask the wrong questions, we're not going to get the answers. And we'll come to that in a moment, but for now, these are the most important pillars of well-being that you can experience in order to upregulate your biological responses in the direction of self-healing or homeostasis or decrease in inflammation in the body. So sleep, average night is or should be 7 to 8 hours. I prefer 8 hours. Of that, 3 hours should be between deep sleep and dream sleep. And the remaining 5 hours is usually light sleep and some periods of waking up. But 3 hours out of the 8 hours should be dream sleep and deep sleep. In dream sleep, your brain waves go to the range of about 4 to 8 hertz per second, cycles per second. In deep sleep, your brain waves go to less than 4. And so both these phases of sleep are for self-regulation. Dream sleep for regulation of what we call the emotional or mental body. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And deep sleep for the regulation of the physical body, which is made of matter and energy, as Naresh so elegantly expressed in his introduction. So your subtle body, mind, intellect, and ego, as we understand in the tradition of Vedanta and wisdom traditions, dream sleep is the cleansing and detoxing of the subtle body, mind, intellect, and ego, buddhi, ahankar, mano, buddhi, ahankar. And then the deep sleep is when amyloid and other toxins are removed and inflammatory markers come down. That is very necessary for physical regulation as well. In fact, now the data suggests that lack of sleep may be the #1 risk factor for premature death from both cardiovascular disease and also long-term appearance of Alzheimer's and many other chronic illnesses. So sleep, meditation, and stress management. There are many ways to manage stress, including music and storytelling and entertainment and dance and imagination and massage. But meditation seems to be the most reliable, as I'll show you some studies. And then movement, both the aerobic movement to increase your cardiovascular capacity, strength training. But recently, a lot of very fascinating research on movement as in yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or any of the martial arts, which stimulates the vagus nerve in the body, which counteracts the sympathetic overdrive that is creating all the havoc in the world. So even as we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, the people who are getting sick, mostly, if they were elderly, they already had a chronic disease and they had inflammation in the body, whether it's diabetes or heart disease or cancer or other autoimmune disease, but they had inflammation in the body that predisposed them to both morbidity and mortality from COVID-19. But even the younger people who were getting sick and dying were actually having what are called inflammatory storms. And inflammation, depression, stress, anxiety precede both acute and chronic illness in almost all the meta-analysis we've done so far. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had the opportunity to look at the indicators, the biological markers of what could predispose people to morbidity and mortality from COVID-19. And it was inflammation, depression, stress, anxiety. And this is all sympathetic overdrive, which creates increased levels of adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, compromises the immune system, and creates inflammatory storms in the body. On the other hand, there's a nerve in our body, which is part of the sympathetic nervous system. It's called the vagus nerve, and all the physicians and health providers who are listening to this will recognize the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve that moves from your midbrain and influences just about everything in your body. And the vagus nerve is the healing nerve and counteracts sympathetic overdrive. So the vagus nerve interacts with the ocular motor nerve, influencing your eye movements. And by looking at a person's facial expression, you can see whether their eyes are expressing fear or anxiety or joy. It also influences the facial nerve. We have about 57, we have 57 facial muscles that express over 100 different emotions. And the vagus nerve influences facial expressions, then also microcirculation in the face. It influences the tone of voice. You can tell by listening to the tone of voice. If you have basic understanding of tone of voice in a particular person, the tone of voice can reveal their state of mind, whether they're anxious, frustrated, happy, sad, etc. Even if they have a hangover, you can tell by the tone of voice. And then vagus nerve influences what is called heart rate variability. If you're relaxed, your heart rate variability is increased. If you're stressed, it's rigid. It influences the depth of breath or breathing. It pierces the diaphragm, influences self-regulation in all the hollow organs of your body and even the solid organs of your body. And then it influences the microbiome in your gut, where 80% of the serotonin in your body is made in your gut by microorganisms, 99% of which are bacterial. So vagal tone is becoming very important. And as those of you who are familiar with yogic practices, yogasanas stimulate different branches of the vagus nerve. That's why we call them yogasana. Asana means seat of awareness. So does breath, so does chanting, so does singing, so does deep breathing, pranayama exercises, and so does dharana, which is focused awareness, dhyan, which is meditation, and pranayama, of course, hundreds of techniques that influence vagal tone. And you can selectively actually stimulate vagus branches of the vagus nerve. In fact, today's revolution is also in the area of digital therapeutics and electroceuticals. People are using vagal implants, using handheld devices to stimulate different branches of the vagus nerve, but you can do that with mind-body practices also. Chanting, singing, breathing, deep breathing, yogasana, dharana, dhyan, samadhi, and particularly pranayama influence vagal tone. And as we speak right now, and there are scientists that we are working with in Israel and also in the United States to create something which would be a maybe 10-second selfie instead of a selfie. So you take a 10-second video, you say, "Hello, I'm Deepak Chopra. How are you? Good morning." And that selfie can read facial micro expressions, eye movements, body language, gestures, correlated with just about everything in your body with new algorithms. And you soon have ways to bioregulate instead of just biofeedback. So a few months ago, I launched active meditation on Fitbit, which is a standard device for measuring exercise, mental states, etc. We had 1.3 billion media impressions because people saw for the first time that you could regulate through these devices everything in your body, from sleep to body, internal organs, something that science is talking about called interoception, not perception, but interoception and visceroception, which is basically a modern term for pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, and directing breath awareness and also attention and intention for self-regulation of the body, which has been known to the great sages and the yogis of India for thousands of years. But now we can actually see that there's no experience in consciousness that does not register as a biological correlate in the brain, and there's no experience in the brain that doesn't have a biological effect in the body. So the next few items I want to mention: emotions. If you're feeling anxiety, fear, hostility, anger, resentments, guilt, shame, depression, your body goes into inflammation. It feels separate and disconnected. On the other hand, if you feel empathy, which means you feel what another person feels, you feel compassion, you have desire to alleviate the suffering of another person, and you embark on love in action, then your body starts to self-regulate. It moves in the other direction. So peace, joy, equanimity, love, compassion, these are, Naresh just mentioned the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, in 18 chapters, you learn all about Raj Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and love in action is basically Karma Yoga. And love in action heals both the person who is performing the action and also the person experiencing the benefits of Karma Yoga. And there's a phenomenon that occurs in the brain called limbic resonance. The limbic brain, which is the emotional brain, which is only found in primates and mammals and humans, it starts to resonate at a certain frequency, and limbic resonance leads to limbic regulation and ultimately limbic revision. You actually change the neural networks of the brain in the direction of homeostasis and away from inflammation. I should say with total honesty that, as a practicing internist, when people asked me or told me they changed their diet, their rheumatoid arthritis disappeared, or their cardiovascular disease reversed, or their bronchial asthma went into a remission, or even a cancer suffered less morbidity, less mortality, less side effects, but even sometimes remission, because a person changed their diet. Now, in all honesty, I didn't believe my patients because I had no scientific basis on how nutrition could actually reverse disease. But now we know that you only have 5,000 human genes. Those are the genes that you inherited from your parents. And those are, in a way, the experiences, or if you want to call it karma, depending on how you interpret the metabolism of experience, that you inherited from your parents. 25,000 genes, which you can't change, but of course you can change their activity through epigenetics. But you also have 2 million to 20 million extra genes in your body, which is the second inoculation of genes, which we call the microbiome. So when a baby comes out of the birth canal, it inhales, swallows, and is covered by the vaginal secretions of its mother. And this creates the second inoculation of genes in the lungs, in the gut, in the skin, just about every orifice in your body. And this is depending on where you live, 2 million to 20 million extra genes that you have. So technically speaking, we are a few human cells living in a bacterial colony, and we have ignored this for all these years. Today we know that 30% of the human microbiome has disappeared from urban societies as a result of what we call manufactured food, refined food, high sugar, food that contains chemicals, inflammatory products, antibiotics, and hormones. And this condition is called dysbiosis. And it is now rampant in the whole world. But if you go on a diet that has maximum diversity of plant-based foods, 7 colors of the rainbow, and as Ayurveda says, the 6 states of life, sweet, sour, salt, bitter, pungent, astringent, you can change 99% of the genetic activity in your body. We didn't know this before. And so this leads to all kinds of new interventions for the future, including upgrading the epigenetic activity of your human genes. And basically, you're changing the software of your body. And I'll address that because we now have a program through our foundation called the Longevity Experiment, where we can hope or aspire, even in the age of Kali Yuga, that people should live to about 100 without disease. If they understand that the body is not matter, not energy, not information, but a modified form of consciousness, then we have all the tools to reinvent the body and resurrect our souls. And I would invite everybody on this panel, particularly Naresh and H.K. Chopra and others, we can jointly share with you the longevity experiment to bring a new age of longevity, health span, and lifespan. It is necessary we do that and get rid of the idea that all disease is predictable, because as we move into the future of disease and health management, we'll see that the future of well-being is precise, it's personalized, it's predictable, it's a process, It requires your participation, but disease is reversible. A lot of disease is reversible. And this is something we didn't know before. So the sixth item over there is biological rhythms. Anybody who's had jet lag knows what a disruption of circadian rhythms is. But about 3-4 years ago, the Nobel Prize went to scientists who had discovered different biological clocks in our body, seasonal clocks, ultradian clocks, gravitational clocks, and so on. And, for all people in the scientific world, this was a new discovery, but Ayurveda has talked about seasonal rhythms, lunar rhythms, daily rhythms, circadian rhythms, gravitational rhythms for thousands of years. And if you walk in nature, or you do something called forest bathing, or if you touch a tree, or if you walk barefoot on the ground or on the beach, you ground yourself, and restoring biological rhythms, circadian, actually influences all the other rhythms in the body. This may be a very quick way to restore biological rhythms. Of course, technology always comes to the rescue. Right now, I'm sitting on a chair which has a cushion that is sending, basically is connected to the center of the earth. And this is a grounding device. And even as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm regulating inflammation in the body by being connected to the earth. Now, you can do that, of course, if you're in a setting like where Naresh is right now in Rajasthan. If he takes his shoes off and goes for a walk outside, he'll be grounding himself and restoring homeostasis as well. The seventh item is something I want to leave for a moment and come back to, because no matter how healthy you are, in the end, there's always old age, not necessarily infirmity, but there's also death. And that's the culmination of a lifespan that began with the fertilized ovum and ends with the last breath. And that obviously has led humans to ask questions like, do we have a soul? Does God exist? What is the ultimate nature of reality? What happens after death? So I'll come to that in a moment, but let me take you to the next slide. The next slide goes beyond what I've said, which is mostly physical well-being and mental well-being, into the bigger ecosystem of well-being. Naresh used the word ecosystem of well-being. So this is the ecosystem of total well-being. This slide is prepared as a result of my work at the Gallup organization, where I have served as a senior scientist for many years. Career well-being simply means, are you happy at your job? If your boss ignores you, your rate of disengagement goes up to 40% or more. If your boss does not ignore you but criticizes you, you get better. You would rather be criticized than ignored, because now at least you exist. So if you're criticized, your rate of disengagement goes down to 20%. But if your supervisor, boss, CEO notices a single strength that you have and expresses it with authenticity, disengagement goes to less than 1%. In the United States, it seems like 30% of workers come disengaged to work. They're unhappy, they make other people unhappy, and everybody gets inflamed. So a good organization, a good business, a good system is where there is shared vision, where everybody complements each other's strengths, where everybody is emotionally and spiritually connected, and suddenly the health of the business improves as well. Because the health of the business is dependent on the health of the ecosystem of the business. In an ecosystem of business, you have employees, you have employers, you have customers. If your employees are healthy and happy, your customers are going to be healthy and happy. And if your customers are healthy and happy, your investors are going to be happy and healthy. That's a good business. Similarly, social well-being. If you have a friend who's a happy friend, your happiness goes up by 15%. But if the happy friend has a happy friend that you don't know, it still keeps going up. This is because we all come with personal stories and we entangle with each other. And if I'm happy, I'm influenced by all my happy friends. If I'm unhappy, I'm influenced by all my unhappy friends. And today, scientists are actually looking at what we call the demographics of happiness, only 10% comes from outside sources. The remaining 90% of your happiness depends on your attitude to life. Do you see the world as a problem or as an opportunity? It also comes on whether you have meaning or purpose in life. It also comes from your ability to make other people happy by giving them attention, appreciation, affection, and acceptance. So social well-being is crucial to physical well-being. Similarly, financial well-being. Ultimately, actually, as we did our surveys, we found that even though there are so many components of well-being, concern about money is the number one insecurity in the world, no matter how rich people are or how poor people are. Concern about money is the number one concern. So financial security depends on other aspects of security, but also on things like insurance, disability, the ability to take time off, etc. And in the United States now, there's a movement called Just Capital. I was one of the original founders of that. And we are looking at financial well-being of everyone in an ecosystem of well-being. And finally, community well-being, something that has not been looked at until recently. You can predict what's going to happen in the United States, everything, including COVID-19 risk, cancer, heart disease, just by looking at the zip code of a person living in the United States. In many Middle East countries, you can see that well-being, community well-being is totally correlated with physical well-being and all other aspects of well-being, and something that we in India enjoyed in the past and still do when you have what we call organized events, a shared passion, some kind of volunteerism, the traditional ways of building a beautiful community. Sangha, which means community, Sangha, Satsang, people who are looking for an ideal way to live life. Sangha, Seva, service, and Simran, which is remembrance of our spiritual nature. In the Buddhist tradition, we say take refuge in the Buddha, which means higher consciousness, refuge in the Dharma, the higher cause, and refuge in the Sangha. So when we build these communities of well-being, they have influence on all aspects of our well-being. If you ask somebody one simple question, and that question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much energy do you have to do all the things you want to do in a given day? And if intuitively they think 8, 9, and 10, they're thriving. If intuitively they say 6, 7, they're struggling. And if their score is less than 5, just on that simple question, how much energy do you have? They're suffering and they probably have a chronic disease already. But the same question can be asked on the scale of 1 to 10 about career, about social well-being, about community well-being, and about financial well-being. And these are very predictive biomarkers, or you should say social markers of what is going to happen in the future. So I mentioned earlier, the future of well-being is precise, it's personalized, it's predictable, it's preventable, and it's reversible. Next slide, please. In our study, we also had Elizabeth Blackburn as a senior scientist. Elizabeth won the Nobel Prize in Medicine a few years ago for discovering the enzyme telomerase. Telomerase is the enzyme that regulates our biological age. And in this one study, the level of telomerase went up by 40%, and everybody was shocked. And now other people have replicated these studies. So we now know that we can even change our biological clock by how we experience time, how we experience our body, what is the meaning that we give to our bodily sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. Okay, now we'll stop here for a moment, and I would like to now share with you the most important aspect of what I was going to say today. And that is, if we live long enough, if we live a healthy life, and if we are able to self-regulate, there is still a point where human beings have to experience the final chapter, and that is called death. So old age, infirmity, and death have been the inspiration for both religion and spirituality. Religion is a dogma, a set of practices, rules and regulations about morality, and usually institutionalized. In India, though, we have something called Sanatana Dharam, the eternal dharma, which says that our final chapter should be about self-realization, to go beyond the world appearance and understand what is fundamental reality. And today, as I said, if you go on Google or you Wikipedia or whatever, and you type out the following question, what are the 125 open questions in science? Open questions mean you don't really know the answer. The first open question in science today is, what is the universe made of? So why is that an open question? It's an open question because 70% of the universe is a mysterious entity called dark energy. And it's not this energy that Einstein spoke about. It's a mysterious anti-gravity energy that is moving the space between galaxies faster than the speed of light. So even though the universe began as a dot, it now extends 47 billion light years away from where we are because of this dark energy, or cosmological constant, as it was called by Einstein. That leaves 30% of the universe, which is remaining. Of that, about 27% is something called dark matter. And dark matter is so called because it's invisible. You can't see it. Why is it called matter? Well, because it has the same effect, gravitational effect, as atomic matter. But this matter, dark matter, is not atomic. It's invisible. It doesn't interact with light, and we are beings of light. Just keep it there for now. It's non-atomic. It's called matter because it curves space-time in the same way as regular matter and is responsible for most of the gravity in the universe. Whatever it is, we probably will never know it because it's not atomic. There are many experiments going on in the world right now to elucidate the nature of dark matter. But if it's not atomic, we have no interaction with it. So only 3% of the universe is atomic, of which 99.999% is invisible interstellar dust. The visible universe, which is 2 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, uncountable trillions of planets. Right now, scientists estimate that there might be 60 billion habitable planets in just the Milky Way galaxy. 2 trillion galaxies. That whole thing is less than 0.01% of the universe. The rest is unknown, unknowable, probably. And the problem with that is atoms are made of particles, and particles, when you're not looking at them, they disappear into waves of possibility. So particles and waves are two different aspects of the same reality. Bottom line, what is the universe made up from? And the answer is that it's made of nothing. So if the universe is made of nothing, why does it look like it looks like to us, with colors and shapes and forms and sounds and tastes and textures? That's called the hard problem of consciousness. And that's the second open question in science. What is the biological basis of consciousness? As I said, these are wrong questions. If you understand Vedanta, then and Kashmir Shaivism and even Buddhism, you will see that the fundamental nature of reality is Chitakash, which means the infinite space of consciousness, which then emerges as the theater of space-time and causality. But the theater of space-time and causality is based on misperception, which means the misinterpretation of perception, which is the magical lie that we know in India as Maya. Maya is the trickster, the veil of ignorance that gives us the appearance of the physical world, even though the physical world is made of nothing. And the play of the physical world is called Leela. And then if you read Yoga Vashishta and other great scholars, They say that there are infinite universes that come and go in the vast expanse of consciousness, like motes of dust dancing in a beam of light. And today science says, in fact, there are infinite universes and infinite lokas as well, but they're all dreamscapes. They're all Maya, just as what we call planet Earth, Karma Bhumi, is part of the Maya. And we are here as fictional characters in Karma Bhumi to actually self-realize the ultimate reality. So when you look at this picture, a lot of you will see a Mexican on a horse with somebody lying on the floor. A lot of you might see an old man with a beard. And actually, it's neither. It's a bunch of colors, which are qualities of awareness that when we give meaning to them, they become a perception of what we call reality. This is how we are conceiving and creating the world all the time, by giving meaning to raw experience of what is called qualia. Qualia is qualities of experience: hardness, softness, colors, shapes, forms, fragrances, odors, and of course the mind, the five senses, and the conditioned mind, which gives meaning and purpose to existence, creating the veil of Maya and the play of Leela. Next slide, please. Many of you will see a woman with locks. Many of you will see two horses with a backdrop of mountain, sky, and clouds. It, in fact, is just a quality of experience. When you give meaning to it, it becomes something. This is how we give meaning to our body. There's no such thing as a body. It's basically made of Chitakash. And when you understand that the body is made of consciousness, and matter, energy, information are human constructs for modes of experience and knowing in consciousness, then it becomes very clear. Jivatma is projecting as the karmic body, Karma Bhumi, and behind the Jivatma is Atman, Brahman. And when we say Aham Brahmasmi, that's actually the fact of liberation, that we are in fact the universe that conceives, constructs, governs, and becomes the experience of existence, the human existence. Other species have their own universes based on narrow bandwidths of perceptual activity, based on their measuring apparatus. The body is a sensor. The five senses are basically five senses, and the mind is what gives meaning to experiences, and this is how we construct the human universe. So I'd like to conclude by saying that if you can see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, think about it, conceptualize it, imagine it, it's not real. The only thing that's real is you, the formless being that curves back within itself and creates again and again. So all the techniques that we have been taught through the wisdom tradition, starting from yama, niyama, to yogasana, to pranayam, to pratyahara, to dharana, to dhyan, to samadhi, are the way of liberation. Thank you very much. I'm happy to explore anything further if you want. But it was a great privilege to be with all of you.
Thank you very much, Deepak. It was a very brilliant exposition. The way you started and explained everything, I have no words to express, because you were beyond our imagination, beyond our understanding. And I think the way you gave a message, which is very, very clear, that reality is you. You are the consciousness. And if you really want to be liberated, followed all the 8 limbs of yoga. I think repeatedly mentioned very nicely, everybody was absorbed to whatever you were talking about. Or from scientific aspect, microbiomes, then to genetics, epigenetics, everything you covered in such a short span of time, which is unbelievable. I think it was a real discourse for each and every one of us. The way Deepak explained about the definition of well-being, total health, including the physical body, the subtle body, the causal body, and he mentioned Candispert. And I think we need to practice meditation. That's a very important message. And meditation is the real answer to realize this self-realization And I think all the 8 limbs of yoga, yama, niyama, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, very well expressed by Deepak. Dr. Naresh Dehan also, I think he mentioned total health, and he also feels the divinity is the need of the hour in our intervention. He said that doctor has to be a healer, and here is a global healer who is with us. We feel very fortunate. I express my heartfelt gratitude to our chief guest and keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Deepak Chopra, for his brilliant exposition with the message of personal transformation by experiencing consciousness as a reality and transforming himself or herself and the whole world. I also express my gratitude and thanks to Dr. Naresh Dehan for his message of holistic health and practice of all the 8 limbs of yoga in our day-to-day practice in every hospital. Hospital should not be a hospital, it should also be a healing home. We need to change the definition of every hospital, and we should not be having an aggressive approach. We should have a very subtle approach as expressed by Deepak. I also express my gratitude and thanks to Mr. Atul Sopti and the whole team of Scope for their devotion, dedication, and the real hard work for last 4 months to make this discourse a success. His whole team. I also express my thanks to Tata Sky Famhealth MD, Mrs. Asha Kapoor, and the team for her support as a media partner. And last but not the least, I am thankful to each and every one of you as the audience. Without you, this program could have not been success. Thank you very much once again, listening to a great hero and an icon of spirituality and science all in one, Dr. Deepak Chopra. Thank you.
Very grateful to all of you, to Scope, to the great audience, and great privilege to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
हेल्थ, फिटनेस और पोषण पर पाए बेस्ट डॉक्टर्स की राय सिर्फ famhealth.in पर, और हमारी YouTube पेज माय फैम हेल्थ पर सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें।